Back, we had a little hiatus. I don't know if it was too long a break or too short a break, but maybe for some people it was both. At any rate, I'm just thrilled to be giving this class, not because I feel I'm particularly qualified. I'm not a professor of biology or of anatomy, and my scholarship in either of these fields is probably that of an elementary school student. But thankfully, we are a Jewish Torah Dissemination Institute and not a scientific think tank. So I'm going to be concentrating much more tonight and throughout this series on the Torah aspects of the anatomy of faith. And as far as the actual human anatomy is concerned, I want to say that, at least for tonight, maybe in the next classes when we get into the eyes and the mouth, we'll explore actual anatomical features a little bit more. But if time allows at the end, I'll give you some examples, again, that I culled primarily from Torah sources, not from scientific sources, about studying anatomy as an act of faith. The first thing that we have to understand when trying to approach, I said, the very archly intelligent designer clothing, right? We would prefer to buy designer clothing, and we know that there's an argument out there for something called intelligent design, and the great evolution versus creationism debate. I'm not sure that the two ideas are even mutually exclusive. I'm not going to go there either. But we know there's something called the intelligent design arguments, and the idea that I'm trying to bring out tonight and throughout this series is the notion that when you have very close-fitting, well-designed, and well-tailored, you go to a good dressmaker, you go to a good tailor, and you've got a physique that you want to conceal and reveal at the same time, and you get a form-fitting outfit. So from studying the outfit, you can begin to understand a little bit of the contours of the body that outfit is concealing. And that's really going to be the approach that I'm taking tonight. So the first thing that we have to understand is the idea of man, but when I say man, I mean human beings, as a microcosm. Let's take a look. Most of you have the books, the two books, the Chumash and the Siddur in front of you. And let's go to the creation narrative, like I always like to do. Take a look on page 5 of the Living Torah. Page 5, and we're going to look at verse 25. Excuse me, 26. God said, "Let us make man with our image and likeness. Let him dominate the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock animals, and all the earth, and every land animal that walks on the earth." Okay? Something very striking in this pasuk is the pronoun. Let us make man. Does not say let me make man. Now this was something that in the original Septuagint, as it's called, is the original Greek translation of the 70 elders of Israel. For Ptolemy the elder, a Greek, one of the people who took over one of the 4 Greek spheres of influence after the death of Alexander the Great, he commissioned the sages of Israel, "I want a translation of the Torah in Greek." And they changed miraculously, according to the Talmud, all 70 elders changed the same things. They felt that certain things had to be altered in translation for fear of misinterpretation. And this was one of the words. When they translated it, in the Septuagint originally it read, "Let me make man." Why? Because "let us make man" is playing right into the Greek polytheistic notions. There are many gods, there's a pantheon of gods, and Zeus is talking to the minor gods and saying, "Let us make man. Let all of us gods make man." We're monotheists, that's a lie. There's only one unified creator. But it begs the question, The Torah is very precise in its wording, in its terminology. What does "let us make man" mean? If it's not a council of gods, if it's not a pantheon, what does it mean? This is the accurate translation. Us reflects the actual Hebrew word. Naaseh Adam. Does it say Eseh Adam? Naaseh Adam. B'tzalmenu k'dmusenu. So what does it mean? So Chaim Volozhiner writes in Nefesh HaChaim, and he sourced in earlier Kabbalists and in the works of the Talmudic sages, says that God was speaking to the rest of creation. It's not an accident that he saved the best for last, so to speak. That the Creator and the creation narrative is creating a human being as the very last thing. Everything that existed on earth and the cosmos, when I say earth, again I'm using the earlier translation that the early biblical translators are fond of, but a more accurate, modern, up-to-date word would be the cosmos. Everything it is, everything in creation that's out there. The very last thing that the Creator creates is a human being. And when God says, "Let us make man," God's speaking to the balance of creation. I want the input of the stars. I want the input of the amoebas. Okay? In man, in human beings, there will be all of that. And this is one of the ways that the classic commentaries explain another very fascinating passage in Bereshis. Take a look on page 9. I'm going to read a few verses here, starting from page 18. Excuse me, from verse 18. Page 9, verse 18. God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a compatible helper." God had formed every wild beast and every bird of the heaven out of the ground. He now brought them to the man to see what he would name each one. Whatever the man called each living thing would remain its name. The man named every livestock, animal, and bird of the sky, as well as all the wild beasts. But the man did not find a helper who was compatible for him. Now, when you read this text, it sounds like two stories or two narratives overlaid one upon the other. On the one hand, we have the idea of searching for a helpmate for man. And here it does mean man specifically. Woman is yet to be created. Woman is going to be created out of man. And then we have this episode of Adam the zoologist, Adam the cataloger of fauna, of animal species. What's the connection between the two? So you have to understand the midrashic subtext over here. The Midrash says that there were various angels that were arguing about whether or not man should even be created. The angel of truth said, "Don't create man, he's full of lies." The angel of altruism, of loving kindness said, "Create man, he's capable of great goodness and great self-sacrifice for other people." Whatever, a lot of different angels were voting. And one of the ways, there are different ways this narrative in the Medrash ends, but one of the verses of the Medrash is God says to the angels, "Here, I'm going to show you that the wisdom and the intelligence of the human being exceeds yours." And how? This episode. There's a parade. Think Noah and the ark. We evoke images more than Adam, right? There's a parade of animals walking in front of Adam. That's an elephant, that's a dog, that's a cat, and so on and so forth. Big deal. What's the brilliance, what's the genius of that? All right? Why does that make a human being superior to an angel? And the way the classic commentators explain it is as follows. Angels are super specialists. Angels are very, very highly refined creatures of God as well. But they all have a very particular role to play. Ambrose Bierce said that specialization means knowing more and more about less and less. Think of angels that way. You don't just have an orthopedist anymore. You have a guy who specializes in tennis elbow for weekend warriors. If you're a professional tennis player, don't go to him. You can only go to him if you're a guy who only plays tennis on the weekend and you develop tennis elbow, and so on, right? Every subpart, every subdivision of every organ has its own specialist. That's what angels are. Okay? God has no lack of angels. One of the names of God is Elokim Tzavakos, the Lord of hosts, of armies. He's got armies and armies, millions and billions of angels. And every particular mission that God needs accomplished, there's an angel appointed to do it. Humans, on the other hand, are holistic. Human beings are a microcosm. And being part elephant, man can name an elephant. Being part lion, man can identify a lion. That was the greatness, the relative superiority of man over the angels. And had he not been a microcosm, he wouldn't have been able to recognize, call it projection, if you want to talk in Freudian terms, of this minor component of him, and how to identify it, how do I quantify that? What part of me do I see in this animal? And what part of me do I see in that animal? And are any of these animals there to truly complement me? Maybe I'll see enough of myself, or enough of what I lack in that animal, that it should be my helpmate. But he didn't. And that's the connection of these two apparently overlay texts that seemingly have nothing to do with one another. So let's talk a little bit for a moment about the macrocosms and microcosms. The first such comparison that I want to make is not between man and the cosmos, but between the tabernacle and the cosmos. Rabbi explains a very interesting thing. We're all here at a Kiruv Center, or at a Jewish Adult Outreach Center, objective, greater knowledge of Torah, hopefully greater observance of the mitzvahs, of the commandments of the Torah. And one of the primary commandments of the Torah is Shmira Shabbos, Sabbath observance. Right? Well, basically, it's only a synonym for a mitzvah observant Jew. We say it's a Shema Shabbos. It's a Sabbath observer. But what is Sabbath observance? It's very, very odd. All it says in the Torah is don't desecrate. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Don't desecrate the Sabbath day. Don't kindle flames in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. That's it. See, me, as long as I don't build a fire, I'm okay. Anyone who's attended even the first 10 minutes of any class on Shabbos observance knows it's a lot more complicated than that. As I once heard two Sameach boys in Yerushalayim discussing their beginner's class on Shabbos. One said to the other, well, what is and what isn't forbidden on Shabbos? He says, well, technically, you can't even breathe on the Shabbat. It's like, the Lumdim in the yeshiva world, they say like this. How does it work that Shabbos desecration is a capital offense? Is it pshat that if I desecrate the Shabbos, then I deserve capital punishment? Or does it mean that everyone going into Shabbos Friday afternoon, everyone is slated to die? If you observe the Shabbos, you can get a reprieve. It's the same thing. Like Shabbos, you can't even breathe. But the truth is that the Chavetz Chaim and Mishnah Berurah, in his Akdama to the third section of Mishnah Berurah that deals with Shabbos observance, says that if you don't study the laws of Shabbos thoroughly, and you have a thorough going knowledge of Shabbos, that he doesn't see how it's possible for anyone to live through a Shabbos and not desecrate it unless by candlelighting they get tied up on a chair and they don't get released from the chair until 26 hours later. There's not a joke. This is the Chavetz Chaim writing, okay? So, but let's talk very broadly. Very broadly, there are 39 prohibited categories of work. Work is a bad translation, of creative activity that are prohibited on Shabbos. You cannot plow, you cannot sow, you cannot harvest, that means disconnecting botanic life from its source of nourishment. You cannot tan hides, you cannot bake, you cannot dye fabrics. Where do all these things come from? There's a total of 39 categories. It comes from the Mishkan, it comes from the tabernacle. Okay? So we could say, look, these are one of the imponderables. This is part of Torah Shabbal Peh. There's encoded messages in the oral tradition of the Torah, and there's a juxtaposition in the Torah of Eshabsosai Tishmo, observe my Sabbath days, Ves Mikdashai Tiro, and my sanctuaries you should be in awe of. And from the juxtaposition of the two, the Talmud says, okay, so how do I observe the Sabbath days? By studying the Mikdash, by studying the sanctuary. What did they do in the sanctuary? To get it up and running, to maintain it, to work it. That's how I'll know how to observe Shabbos. Okay, fine. Doesn't have to make sense. A lot of hermeneutical rules. The Talmud operates with a logic all its own. But Rabbi Bachaya gives us a little bit of an insight. He says, it's not arbitrary. It's because the tabernacle is a microcosm. There was a menorah, there was a 7-branch candelabrum in the tabernacle. Those 7 things represent celestial bodies. Which particular celestial bodies, and why only? Maybe each one is a solar system, maybe each one is a galaxy, I'm not sure. It's very hard to translate the terminology of a medieval sage into our contemporary technological jargon. But whatever it means something. He quotes the famous passage of the prophet Yecheskel, Ezekiel, that it says about God's throne room on high, Srafim, Omdim Mimalo, that above God they were hovering, they were flying these fire angels, a seraph, even in English, a seraphim, all right? Fire angel. And the operative word is Omdim, they're standing. About this, the Talmud comments, Lamala, on high, in the purely spiritual spheres, Srafim Omdim Mimalo, there are these fire angels standing. The Khan, or Lamata, I forget the exact terminology of the Talmud, Atze Shitim Omdim. Okay? Cedar wood standing vertically. The vertical boards out of which the tabernacle was assembled was also something standing. So somehow or another, these vertical boards of the tabernacle were an allegory for these fire angels. And it's not just the fire angels in God's throne room, says Rabbi Bachaya. Everything in the cosmos was represented, was embodied, was symbolized, however you want to understand it, in the tabernacle. So it makes perfect sense. Because if the Sabbath is an act of imitatio Deo, we're imitating God, there was a cessation of God's creative activity on the Sabbath day. All right? So if we say that by studying the tabernacle, in human terms, we can understand, we can quantify the categories of creative activity to make such a structure, that's what you have to stop doing on Shabbos. Makes perfect sense. It's not just an inscrutable code anymore. If we posit that the Mishkan is a microcosm, then we can begin to understand how there's a connection, there's a correlation between not building a Mishkan on Shabbos and observing Shabbos. So that's one level of correlation. The Ibn Ezra says that there's a correlation between the tabernacle and human beings. So if we go a little transitive theory, if the macrocosm, if the big world of the cosmos equals the Mishkan, and if the Mishkan equals human being, that means man is a microcosm. The big cosmos equals man. And I just want to share with you 2 beautiful thoughts from the Ibn Ezra. He's trying to explain one of the great imponderables of Judaism, maybe in other religious thought systems as well, but I'm a rabbi, so let's talk Judaism. Okay? I'm not studying comparative religion tonight. What does it mean to have a temple? What does it mean to have a holy land? And this is not, empty, pointy-headed, intellectual speculation. What are we shedding Jewish blood for the land of Israel for? What makes Jerusalem any better than Jerusalem 2 pizza shop in Brooklyn? What makes it a holy? It's a holy city. It's empty woods. What does holiness mean? Why does the Temple Mount mean anything? Why does the Western Wall mean anything? What does the Cave of the Page? What is Kedushas HaMakom? What do we mean when we say holiness attached to a particular place? When we believe in an infinite God. Maloch HaLoretz Kvodo. The whole cosmos is suffused, it's filled with His glory. What does it mean to have a particular place? So listen to this beautiful mashal that the Ibn Ezra says. He says, just as we find in the human body, okay, there's a soul that animates the body. If you don't want to talk so metaphysically, so spiritually, the brain directs all conscious and conscious activities of the body. Every move we make, even reflex action, even unconscious actions, it's all being directed by the brain through the nervous system. And nevertheless, we know that there are some places in the body that have a greater concentration of nerve endings. Okay? They're capable of different, or I should say more intense sensation. They can feel pleasure more, they can feel pain more, they can feel numbness more, they can feel cold more, they can feel hot more. Right? There's certain parts of our body that have a higher concentration of nerve endings than others. There's certain parts of the body, certainly internally, that where nerve endings are almost absent, and relatively they're totally insensitive. It's like, just walking around with a couple of big calluses on your body. Right? He says that's the idea of a sanctuary. A sanctuary doesn't mean that there's no God on Flushing on the zip code of 11367. Okay? But the concentration of nerve endings, if you will, of the ability of the world to sense God, to sense the presence of God, that's greater in Jerusalem. A little bit less, I should say, that's greatest in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. A little bit less in the city of Jerusalem. A little bit less in the boundaries of the land of Israel. And once you get beyond the boundaries of the land of Israel, the balance of the world is already more or less, can't say nerve-ending free, but relative to the land of Israel, a much less sensitive place, if you will. And he says a beautiful mashal when he talks about this idea. It's really the Rambam and the Rabbi and the Chovas Halvavos, who talk about man being a microcosm and Olam Katan. I just want to show you one beautiful premise from the Ibn Ezra. Let's take a look. We're not in the Genesis narrative anymore. We are in, let me tell you 1 second, I have the parak, I don't know the page number. This is a whole different story. This is talking about when Joseph's brothers were going back to the land of Canaan after getting provisions during the famine years, and they were trying to be framed for a crime that they didn't commit, namely stealing the divining cup of the Egyptian viceroy, aka Joseph. Right? So it says that they started inspecting the sacks of the various brothers. Okay? This is chapter 42, verse 12, but I need a minute to tell you which page number it's on.
221, I think, or 220? No.
42, verse 12.
What is it, the page?
211.
Okay.
That's me, Pat.
No, this doesn't make sense. 44, I'm sorry. 44, 12. That's more like it.
221.
221. Yeah.
221?
Yes. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, Sol, the nuisance in here tonight. My independent credibility and corroboration for Hebrew. You'll have to take my word on it, okay? Take a look at verse 12. The Living Torah renders it, the overseer inspected each one, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. The shallows were found in Benjamin's pack. The Hebrew reads, V'gadol hechel uva'katan kila. Literally, the words gadol and katan in Hebrew do not mean oldest and youngest. When you're talking about human beings of various ages, so that's a good way to translate it. I'm not saying it's a mistranslation. But literally, gadol means big and katan means small. Okay? He began with the large and he ended with the small. Says the Ibn Ezra, this is an allusion to the divine acts of creativity. God began with a big world, Bagadol Hechel. He began with a macrocosm, Uvakatan Kila, and he finished his creative activities with the creation of human beings, the small world. But it's the same thing miniaturized. Bagadol Hechel, Uvakatan Kila. He ends his creative activity with the small man. So we've got three sets, if you will. Okay, we've got the cosmos, we've got the tabernacle, and we've got human beings. And it's one creator for all of them. And we have to understand that even when a human artist creates something of enduring worth, an artistic work of genius, it testifies to the craft and to the genius, the artistic genius of its creator. You look at Michelangelo's David, I don't know how many centuries Michelangelo has been dead, But you don't need a lot of art appreciation trying to say this is genius. This is unbelievable. I can't imagine what kind of a mind, what kind of a spirit, what kind of dexterity, what kind of motor skills, what kind of hand-to-eye coordination went into creating something like this. When you read a sonnet of Shakespeare, same thing. It's beautiful. It's so moving. It's archaic English. I don't quite grasp it, but I know there's something of beauty here. So, even Jackson Pollock, right? No, for that I'll need plenty of training. I'm sorry. You'll forgive me. But actually, Jackson Pollock is probably a better allegory for God because the genius is not so readily apparent. Well, at least for us Philistines, us Cretans. Okay.
What was he a writer?
No. What was he a writer? Okay, I'm ahead of that. Okay. Okay. So now, I want to read from you, not from a Jewish source, but it's been co-opted by a lot of the later Jewish thinkers, about one of the greatest allegories for the argument for intelligent design, testifying to an intelligent designer. This is from William Paley. William Paley lived from 1743 to 1805. He was trained for the Cambridge Anglican priesthood. Now I want to read you just a quote from Professor Paley, or Reverend Paley, whatever he was called. When we come to inspect the watch, we perceive that its several parts are framed and put together for a purpose. That is, they are so formed and adjusted as to produce motion. And that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day. Right? That's what the machine that we call a watch does, and what it's designed for. That if the different parts have been differently shaped from what they are, or placed after any other manner or in any other order than that in which they are placed, either no motion at all would have been carried on in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. The inference, we think, is inevitable, that the watch must have had a maker. That there must have existed at some time, at some place or other, an artificer, or artificers, that means manufacturers, who formed it for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. Okay, that's what we call a mashal, an allegory, and the nimshal, what it's symbolizing, is patent and apparent. When you have an ecosystem, when you have harmony in nature, let's talk for a moment in the macrocosm. When you have the movement of the celestial bodies, the elliptical orbits of moons and of solar systems and of galaxies, all the way down to the elliptical orbits of the electrons around the nuclei of an atom, whether you're going for your telescope or your microscope, the way things interdepend upon one another, and the way things dovetail and work in harmony, it's a well-greased machine. And even what we consider to be the ruptures, okay, things that seem out of order, an earthquake, a tsunami, right? There's an order to what seems to be out of order as well, that also regulates, Our sages teach us that part of our theology is to appreciate God as an artist. Maybe some of you are familiar from your davening with the expression of Ein Tzur Kelokenu. There's no rock, there's no jagged rock like unto our God. The Talmud says, don't read that word Tzur, read that word Sayar. There is no artist, there is no painter like God. Why? Because a human artist casts a die to form coins and medallions, and each one comes out identical. Each one is a clone of the other one. And God cast the die. He said, let us make man, b'tzalmeinu k'dmusenu, in our form and in our structure. And each one is as unique as a snowflake. There's no artist like that. Nasa adam b'tzalmeinu k'dmusenu. When God said that, let us make man, He wanted the input of the rest of His creation. And He created human beings. We have to understand to appreciate God as the artist. And if we can appreciate the genius, the artistry, and the purpose, okay? Michelangelo was trying to convey something with his sculpture. Shakespeare was certainly, writers are certainly trying to communicate a message with their writing. Right? We have to understand that that's God's objective too. And how much more so? You ever see that famous picture? At the risk of offending the Jackson Pollock fans in the room, because I know this is probably the opposite end of the spectrum, but I happen to like Norman Rockwell, okay? Right? All the Saturday Evening Post covers. You ever see that one, where there's like a mirror and he's leaning? Right? Okay? Self-portraiture and autobiography is the most revealing form of art. If we can begin to understand, you want to deconstruct the literature of John Steinbeck, of Thomas Pynchon, of any of the great contemporary writers. That's one way of analyzing what they were all about. But certainly if they wrote a diary, if they left a journal, if they published an autobiography, okay, if it's not totally self-serving, if it's not a fluff piece where they're trying to airbrush out all the warts from the picture, so to speak, you come much closer to appreciating what the artist was. Self-portraiture in painting or in sculpture, autobiography in writing. So we have to understand that God, the artist, when He creates man, that's an act of self-portraiture. Bitzalmeinu, kidmusenu, like us, in our form, in our image. Exactly the definition of what it means to be in God's image. That's a subject for another class or another series. Intelligent designer clothing. What do I mean when I say the body is clothing? Let's go back to the Genesis narrative for a moment. And some of you who've been to some of my other classes, I'm sure have heard this explanation of the Malbim before, but it bears repetition. It's so beautiful. Doesn't get old, at least as far as I'm concerned. A very faithful verse in the Genesis narrative is right about before the fall of man and woman, as it were. Page 13. Okay, I'm not going to read verse 23 and 24, but a quick synopsis of 23 and 24 is that episode of the naming of the animals culminates with God causing man to fall into a deep sleep, fashioning Eve out of Adam, and now he discovers this is it. This is my ultimate helpmate. I'm the yin, she's the yang, whatever it is, this is it. And then it says in verse 25, the man and his wife were both naked, but they were not embarrassed by one another. The word for embarrassed in Hebrew is yisboshashu. Vayushneim arumim v'lo yisboshashu. The Malbim, for those of you who were here for the Great Books series, you remember that the Malbim was a great etymologist. He was very into the structure of words and trying to ferret out the shades of meanings of apparent synonyms and so on. So he's very concerned with this word yisboshashu. He says if the word just means not to have been embarrassed, it should have said v'lo yevoshu. They were not embarrassed. That would have been more grammatically correct in Hebrew. To say lo yisboshashu really means not just that they weren't embarrassed, but they did not tarry, they did not delay. Okay? Last week's parsha. Keep one hand on page 13 for a moment, and then zoom ahead. To page 449. Yeah. 449, verse 1. In chapter 32. Everyone have it? 449? I'll give you another minute. I hear some pages ruffling. Okay. So it says, this is a preamble to another fall of humanity. Interesting, the parallels. That a very similar word should appear in both narratives. Meanwhile, the people began to realize that Moses was taking a long time to come down from the mountain. Okay, the exact word in Hebrew is boshesh. He was tarrying. He was late. He was delayed. Okay? Says the Malbim, when it says by Adam and Eve, the loyis by Shashu, they did not tarry, they did not delay, he says the meaning is as follows. Unlike contemporary human beings, and all human beings, and Adam and Eve themselves, after they sinned, there was a very different relationship between body and soul that Adam and Eve had and that we have between our bodies and souls. Adam and Eve, before the sin, understood their bodies to be nothing more than a garment. It's a garment for my soul. And therefore, just as easily as we can take off a hat or throw off our jackets or our coats, that's how easy it was for them to achieve a state that the Jewish Kabbalists call hispashtus hagashmius, unclothing oneself of corporeality. And the Rabbi at the beginning of Shulchan Aruch says that a person is supposed to meditate before davening, before prayer, until they approach a near prophetic state of ecstasy, of hispashtus hagashmius, where they feel almost like an out-of-body experience. They're about to commune with God, and they're leaving their mortal coil behind. A lot easier said than done. I would almost say, don't try this at home, kids, except what can I do? This isn't a mystical tract, it says in the Shulchan Aruch. This is what every Jew is supposed to aspire to when they pray. But it's a tough road to hoe. It's not easy to do. It takes a lot of time. It takes hours and hours of meditation and maybe years and years of training. For Adam and Eve, it was thrown off the coat. They were naked. Why weren't they embarrassed? Because their nudity was being clothed. What we call nudity was to them being clothed. If we look in the mirror, we look at this and say, oh, this is me. And certain private, intimate parts of my body, oh, that's me. I'm exposed. I can't. That's not for publication. That's not for the whole world to see. I need to cover myself. I need to be clothed. But if this is not me, if the soul is me, so this is covering my nudity. This is covering my essence. I'm covered. There's no humiliation because there's no delay in leaving the body. And the body was a perfect form-fitting, like a second skin, if you will, to the soul. That's how Adam and Eve perceived themselves. Take a look ahead a little bit. One page 15. On verse 21. Okay? I read you the preamble to the story of the fall of man, and this is the denouement, this is the last word before the expulsion. Well, it's still in Eden. This is the last thing that happens. Verse 21. God made leather garments for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. Okay? Before the fall, there was no humiliation in their apparent nudity. After the fall, to start the mahalach hatikun, to start the restorative, the reparative process, there's got to be clothing. God makes them clothing, he fashions clothing from them, it says leather clothing here, and he covered them. This verse is a very, very controversial verse in the Medrash. First of all, there's a big controversy in the placement of it. Some commentaries, I'm saying all the way back to the Talmudic Midrashic era, feel that this is out of place, that this verse should have been written right after the verse that I just read you. That God actually fashioned them, these clothes, whatever they were exactly, that's a point of controversy, before they sinned. But here's the really telling thing. Rabbi Kaplan does a wonderful job. Yes, leather clothing. The word in Hebrew is ur. Ur means a hide. Okay? Now, animal hides are usually tanned and made into leather. Okay? If we're not card-carrying members of PETA, we usually don't like to think about these things. But our belts and our shoes come from the skin, from the epidermis of animals. Right? Okay? We don't think of it that, oh, leather goods, tan leather goods. Maybe if you have an alligator pocketbook or something like that, you can still see the reptilian, texture and the material. But we don't normally think of it that way. Leather, skin, there's a disconnect. But literally the word means skin. God made them garments of skin. Okay? One authority in the Medrash says that, like on my creepy flyer that I made, with the guy with from the bodies exhibit, the South Seaport, that's what Adam and Eve looked like before this episode. When it says clothing of skin, it means they didn't have epidermis till then. Literally their own skin. They got their own skin then. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation means that why in the world at this point would God kill an animal? He's not going to hide, he's not going to skin an animal alive. So it must mean something that comes from skin. Wool. Hair comes from skin. It means he made wool garments. But what's most fascinating is Rabbi Meir's approach. The way our sages say it, it's very interesting. Not just Rabbi Meir Omer, like the most Talmudic or Midrashic disputes, Rabbi Meir said. It says, "B'tayrasai shel Rabbi Meir ayakasav, kasnos or im aleph." In the Torah scroll of Rabbi Meir, the way this verse was written was garments of light. The word "ar" in Hebrew, if it's spelled with the first letter an ayin, it means hide, skin. If it's spelled with an aleph, pronounced the same way, or at least very similarly, ayin is a little bit more guttural. "Ar" is with an aleph, "ar," something like that, would be with an ayin. But garments of light. God gave them garments of light. What does that mean? So here, I have to do something that I don't usually like to do, because as my Rashivi Zatzal used to say about the proliferation of supposed Kabbalists out there in the modern era, those who tell don't know, and those who know don't tell. So I'm about to talk a little Kabbalistic terms over here, but I'm not trying to snow anybody over here. Any similarity between me and an actual adept at Kabbalah is purely coincidental. I'm just giving you some basic outlines to try to understand so we can move on with tonight's class. Three Kabbalistic terms. Let's do it very briefly because, like I said, I don't know too much more what I'm talking about than any of you sitting here tonight. There's something called Tzimtzum, there's something called Or Ein Sof, and there's something called Sfiros. Basically, what these terms mean are as follows. Tzimtzum is a philosophy, is an ideology, a thought system that says that for creation to take place, God, as it were, had to contract into himself. When God suffuses anything, if there's no void in which creation takes place, then there's no room for anything other than God. You cannot have a clear delineation between creator and creature, between creator and created, between the artist and the self-portrait, if the artist is everywhere and is everything, so to speak. So there's got to be a creation to create a void. But somehow or another, God still retains his infinite nature. Well, what do you mean? If he's withdrawing into himself, then he has boundaries. He's got to end somewhere for the void to begin. No, we don't say that. That's heresy already. Somehow or another, God retains his infinite nature even after the contraction, and shines a light into creation, and that's what causes creation. And that light is called the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, the light of infinity. And the way that this light gets suffused through creation, through the creative act, is something that the Kabbalists call the Eser Sfiros, the 10 circles, the 10 emanations. Let me show you quickly a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which we've also touched upon in previous series. Take a look now not in the Living Torah, but in the Siddur. What am I holding here? It's gotten light. I finished tonight. Take a look on page 571. It's the first Mishnah in chapter 5. Give everyone a minute just to get the place. 571. Mishnah 1. With 10 utterances the world was created. What does this come to teach us? Indeed, could it not have been created with one utterance? The answer of the Mishnah does not concern me for tonight's class. The world is created with 10 utterances. On a prosaic level, if you go through the Genesis narrative, you'll see. Let there be light, that's one of the utterances. Let there be a firmament, that's another one. If you know how to do the counting, you'll come up with 10. But the way the Jewish mystics appreciated this Mishnah was, the 10 utterances caused 10 emanations of divine attributes. Try to think of it kind of as a cascading pool. Try to think of it as a fountain where you've got a larger basin on top, and then a smaller basin, and a smaller basin, and the water just keeps on cascading till it gets to the bottom. Or maybe the other way around, the smallest basin on top, and the largest basin on the bottom. But the way the infinite light emanates into creation is it goes to something called a Seder Hishtalshalis, a way of emanation through these 10 receptacles. These kalim, these vessels that somehow or another hold the light, but can't contain the light because of its infinite nature, and the light kind of overflows and moves on to the next one. And the further it emanates through creation, the less evident it becomes. The highest vessel is the most gossamer, the most see-through vessel. The lowest vessel is so opaque that you can't even tell that there's a light inside of the vessel. Our hide, physicality, corporeality, conceals our light. 2 words, the same word. In our Sifrei Torah it says, God made them clothing of hide. In Rabbi's Sefer Torah it says, He made them clothing of light. And those are not mutually exclusive explanations. It's just that the thicker the hide, if you will, the more corporeal, the more, we Yiddish speaking people like said, the more gashmiistic, okay, the more earthly, the more material it is, okay, the more we read it as hide and don't read it as light. Skin and not as light. We don't see any light. Moses, who was a very godly person, his skin suffused light. Yeah. Right? One of the great people talking about the Renaissance artists over there, one of the anti-Semitic canards that Jews have horns because Michelangelo's sculpture of Moses has little horns. Why? Because the Hebrew word keren says karan arpanav. The hide, the skin of his face shone. Beams, like sunbeams, came out. But the word keren could also mean a horn. And the medieval churchmen who were translating the Bible didn't know what this meant from the Hebrew. Okay, a horn, like an animal horn. Moses must have horns. Okay, if Moses, the greatest Jew, had horns, so all Jews have horns. Serious. That's how that developed, how that myth developed. The Balaturim says a beautiful thing on this pasuk of God making suits, clothing of hide for Adam and Eve. Says again, here you're going to have to trust me, not even the translation, just how to count. Okay, again, take a look back on page 15. If you can look on 14, those of you who can read Hebrew, take a look at verse 21. And for those of you who can't, just watch as I count out on my fingers. Okay? I'm reading, as I read the words of this verse, I'm counting them as well. Vayas, Hashem, Elokim, Le'adam, Uli Ishto, Kosnos, Ar, Vayal Bishem. There are 8 words. In English there may be more than 8. In the Hebrew original, there are 8 words in that verse. Says the Baal HaTurim, I think it's based on an earlier on a Medrash. You know what kind of clothing God made for Adam and Eve? 8 garments. You know who wears 8 garments? The high priest. Big Day Kahuna, the high priest wears 8 garments. What does that mean? A high priest wears 8 garments. When he's going to the corner kosher pizza shop, he's wearing the 8 garments. When does he wear 8 garments? When he's standing and serving God. That means that this clothing of flesh, of hide, that God made for man, are tools, are implements, are vessels for divine service. You serve God with the clothing that God gave you. And this is the clothing that God gave us. How do we serve God with that clothing? I'm not a high priest. I'm not in the temple in Jerusalem. How do we serve God with that clothing? So, we have to understand that our bodies are the glove that fits. How did Johnny Cochran say? If the glove fits, you must acquit. Right? I say, If the glove fits, you must not quit serving God. Okay? That's my take on it. Let's start very simple. What?
Leather.
Pardon me?
Is there something to the leather as opposed to some other garment that was utilized? Is there some symbolism?
No, not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. It's just the simplest.
Could have been something else.
It's the most prosaic translation of the word. Okay. First of all, our sages tell us as follows. We all know that there are how many mitzvahs in the Torah? 613. However, they're divided between 365 negative commandments and 248 positive commandments. And our sages tell us that there are 248 limbs in the human body.
Male human
And there's, pardon me?
In the male human body.
In the male human body. Are you sure about that?
One of the numbers is different for females, so they always say male.
Okay. I know who they are, but I'll take your word for it. 365 limbs in the body, and, another way around. 248 limbs, 365, gidin is a hard word to translate. Some people translate it as sinews, some people say nerve endings. It's hard to know exactly what it is. But it's clear. What do we mean to say? We mean that the Torah regimen corresponds precisely to the human body, to the structure of the human body. The Torah is not physical. The Torah is art. The Torah is light. The Torah is pure spirit. And yet the structure of the Torah corresponds exactly.
Or our body corresponds to the Torah.
Right. Either way you want to say it. Depends which direction you're looking from top to bottom or from bottom to top. What time is it now? I can't see it. I don't have a watch on me. 9:03. Okay, I'm going to go another 10 minutes, and I think half of the class I plan on giving tonight, I'll give next week. Okay. Rav Tzadok HaKohen says the following. Jewish etymologists, this is the Gemara, this is not his invention. There's something called osios mischalfos. There are certain letters in the Hebrew alphabet that are interchangeable. Okay? We can even see, you appreciate this medrash that we just learned. Is it R with an aleph or is it R with an ayin? You can play fast and loose a little bit with a aleph and an ayin. Now try making these two sounds, if you will. Try the experiment yourself. We're not conscious of it because we're talking, especially I'm talking more than I should be, a million words a minute. We don't really pay any real attention to letter and sound formation. Try making the sound that the letter K makes. Go ahead. Everyone try making a K. Okay. Try making the letter that a G, not a J, makes. No, that you just said a J. Good. Okay. Now, pay attention. Again. K, G, K, G. Isn't it very close? Okay. Our sages tell us that the osios, the letters Gimel in Hebrew, and Kuf are osios mischalfos. You can swap a Gimel for a Kuf. And the Targum Onkelos does it very often. Sometimes all he does when he translates a word from Hebrew to Aramaic is he replaces a Gimel with a Kuf, or vice versa. What does the word for that letter mean? Anyone know what a Kuf means? A Kof? What's a Kof? A monkey. And what do we say about monkeys? Monkey see, monkey do. All right? Again, without casting a vote in the evolution versus creationism debate, but I think everyone would agree, creationists and evolutionists alike, that primates are closest to human beings of all the rest of the life forms on the planet. All right? Kof b'fnei adam. All right? It's even an adjective. To monkey someone basically means to imitate somebody. Says Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. It's unbelievable. You got to be a rabbi to say something like this. Avram Avinu, Abraham, was how many years old when he became a father? Anybody know? 100. Sarah was 90. Avram Avinu was 100. What's the numerical value? What letter in the Hebrew alphabet has the numerical value of 100? A kuf. Okay? When he's got to sire Yitzchak, when he's got to be the father of Yitzchak, the firstborn Jew, the portion, the last best hope, if you will, for humanity, after the cataclysm of the expulsion from Eden, after the cataclysm of the idol-worshipping Dar Enosh, generation of Enosh, the generation of the flood, the generation of Babel, basically Abraham's family is humanity's last best chance. And they've got to be monkeys. They've got to be kufs in their goof. Their bodies have to be, to their spirits, to their souls, like a monkey is to a human being. They've got to be imitative. They've got to have opposable thumbs, like other primates do. Not as long as our thumbs, but they have opposable thumbs as well. Like a kof if they are them, like a monkey before a human being. That's how the Yiddish guf, if you will, the Jewish body that's produced by Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak, has to be for the neshama, has to soul. There's got to be a glove that fits. There's got to be a one-to-one correspondence between the physicality and the spirituality. And not just in terms of how many mitzvahs do I have to do. Not only in terms of a regimen of 613 mitzvahs. In my flesh I see God. You know, I was talking about how the divine infinite light, as the emanations get lower and lower, and the vessels get thicker and thicker, even though this light is infinite, it becomes more and more invisible. The Chidushei HaRim said that there's a curse in the Tochacha, in the chastisement portion of the Torah, where God says, "V'anochi haster aster panai mikam b'yomahu." I will conceal my face from you on that day. It's a redundancy. Incidentally, parenthetically, we're heading into the festival of Purim. According to the Talmud, that's an allusion to the heroine of the Purim story, Esther. How do I know that there's Esther? Where does it say? Where is there an allusion in the Torah to the historical person Esther? But the Chidushei HaRim asks, what does it mean to say a double concealment? He says, because sometimes, I'm going to update his mashal, his parable a little bit, you know? You have some kids who are playing hide and seek. And everybody knows that there's somebody hiding. And that's the game. The game is to find the hidden person, the hidden kid. But there was one kid who forgot whose turn it was. Right? And stayed behind, and the kid's in the hiding place. And all the other kids went home. They don't even realize that there's anybody hiding anymore. He says there's one level of divine concealment where God is concealed, invisible, insensate. We cannot feel God, we cannot touch God, we cannot sense God. But we know that He's there. And maybe we're even seeking Him out. There's a hide and seek game going on. But then there's sometimes a double concealment where you don't even realize that there's anything concealed anymore. There are agnostics out there. They doubt the existence of God. There are atheists out there who deny emphatically the existence of God. There's nobody hiding. Nature is not a cloak for God. Nature is nature. Finished. There's nothing behind it. There are even some of us who have moments when we're agnostics and atheists. It's not mutually exclusive to be a believer and to be an agnostic and an atheist. Right? But that has to do with the human condition, the condition of these 10 emanations, and this lowest world is ripe for a state, sometimes if conditions are not favorable, for a double concealment, for a concealment that's so thick and so all-enveloping that you don't even realize anymore that there's anything concealed there. So how do we sense God? How do we break through these barriers of corporeality? How can we interface with God? And there's basically three approaches. Through Torah study, through nature study, and through self-awareness. And this series is about self-awareness. Let me read you a quick passage from the Chovos HaLevavos. Maybe some of you saw the flyer. There's a verse in Job that reads, "U'b'sari echsa Elokai," from my own flesh I will see God. About this, the Chovos HaLevavos writes as follows. Although it is imperative and obligatory to reflect on all of them, he means all kinds of wisdom and natural studies, to help a person see God, the most accessible and apparent kind is the mark of wisdom manifest in the human species, the microcosm, the ultimate reason for the existence of the cosmos. When we arrive at an understanding of these aspects of man, much of the mystery of this world will be deciphered. For man resembles the world. One of the wise men has already remarked that philosophy is man's knowledge of himself. That is, his knowledge of the aspects of man we have mentioned. So that from the evidence of the divine wisdom displayed in himself, or herself as the case may be, he or she may come to recognize the Creator, may be exalted. As it is written, "For my own flesh I will see God." There's also a verse in the Psalms, in Tehillim. This is Psalm 35, verse 10, where the pasuk in Hebrew reads, "Kol atzmosa tamarna Hashem nichamocha." All of my bones will declare, God, who is similar unto you. And the Radak, one of the classic commentaries on the Tehillim, on the whole Tanakh, has several explanations of what this verse means. But his second explanation reads, "O pirish atzmosai, b'chol atzmosai, ki mitchunas yitziras evrei haguf, yishabach adam habarei." All of my bones will praise God, will say, God, who is comparable unto you. That from the tchuna, the nature, the structure of the creation of the limbs of a human being, including the skeletal structure, including the bones, a person will come to praise God. Now, you can't praise something that's unknown. You're praising something that you've come to know. So our physical plant is an allegory for all kinds of spiritual lessons. And I'd hope to share about 5 or 6 with you tonight, and even get into the, just some of the wondrous, intelligent design, if you will, the clockwork, well-meshed oiled machine of various systems and various organs. But I think we're being grabbed by the clock. I don't want to do too much of a good thing. But we'll do a little more of it next week, and then we'll touch upon the eyes have it as well. Thank you all for coming. There's a collation in the next room. And I'm